Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. And since our ranking member mentioned the failure of the Silicon Valley Bank, and I'm also from California, just to be clear, I would like to state for the record that SVB's failure was about liquidity, not capital. And I think it also had to do with the mismanagement of the banks and the failure of the regulators. But I want to start by coming back to the focus of our hearing and make a couple of observations. One, I am deeply concerned that the Basel III Endgame and the other proposals will make credit more expensive for small businesses, and it will reduce mortgage lending to low to moderate income households and put our banks at a competitive disadvantage abroad. I'm also concerned that the current proposal as written does not enjoy broad consensus from the Federal Reserve Board. It's been reported that certain European countries want carve-outs on their own Basel III Endgame proposals to protect their banks from the increased cost of higher capital requirements. And in Asia, 3 of the top 10 companies in the world are giant-sized, state-owned Chinese banks that, to my knowledge, aren't planning to implement the Basel framework anytime soon. Question to you, Mr. Baer. One of the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision's core mission is to harmonize regulatory standards to bring other international jurisdictions up to the US regulatory standards. So in your view, what will happen to the competitiveness of our banking industry if US capital standards are not harmonized with other international jurisdictions?
Yes, I mean, it's a great point, Congresswoman. Actually, at the time that the 27 agreement on Basel was announced, they said they did not expect an increase in capital requirements. They published a quantitative impact study showing that it would not result in an increase in capital requirements. Around the world, you see that basically being the trend. The Bank of England has implemented with a 3% increase in capital requirements, compared to, I think, the initial estimate from the US regulators was 16%. I think when they're done with the QIS, it's going to be closer to 20. So clearly, if the desire is consistency, we are failing utterly. We have a US-only GSIB surcharge methodology, which is roughly double the global standard. We have a US-only stress test and stress capital charge, which again largely duplicates the op risk and market risk charges in Basel. So it just goes on. And as noted, even for small businesses, although they don't directly compete, but just as a measure of rationality, both the UK and the EU have abandoned the securities listing requirement.
Yeah, so Mr. Baer, if the financial regulatory agencies move forward with the Basel III Endgame proposal, would you say that credit will be more expensive for our small businesses, manufacturers, and families when compared to other countries in the US and Asia?
Absolutely, Congresswoman. I mean, the capital charge for a loan to a U.S. small business would be significantly higher than for a small business.
You know, our country is the envy of the world because we have more banks than anywhere in the world. In fact, more than 4,000 banks provide credit to most corners of our society. The question to you, Mr. Gwen, in your testimony, you state that under the proposals, large regional banks will have strong economic incentive to consolidate to better compete against U.S. GSIBs. So can you elaborate on how the proposals will push banks to consolidate? And can you also tell the committee how greater consolidation will impact credit for small businesses and households?
Yes, okay, so the reason there's a disproportionate impact on the regional banks is they are subject to the increase in capital by the Basel III Endgame, and a rule that used to only apply to the or currently only applies to the GSIBs will now be extended to them, where they're now going to be subject to subordinated long-term debt requirement. Subordinated debt is just a different name for an additional capital requirement. So when you add those two together, basically they will now be subject to nearly 2 times the amount of capital that they're currently subject to. That will be very expensive for them. They're smaller than the GSIBs. They will feel a need to have a larger scale to be able to spread those costs over a larger base. And so they will have a powerful incentive to merge and consolidate. And also, if I do think that it's a sort of separate issue on small businesses. I think that the real issue for the small businesses is I think the regional banks will continue lending to small, medium-sized businesses, which they focus on, but the risk weights will now disincentivize that because they will say, well, I only am charged a capital equal to 65% of a loan that I make to a large business that is publicly listed, but I have to have 100% charge for a smaller business.
The gentlelady's time has expired.